Hello. Hello. Man, guys, it's been a minute. It's a Tuesday. In February 18th. And on this day, February 18th, we are going to continue reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which I feel like I've been reading forever. But we're only about halfway. We're a little past halfway through. And we're going to keep going and figure out what happens next to our squad on the sea. It looks like now the Nautilus, the submarine, is heading toward the Mediterranean Sea. And it says, in less than 20 minutes, the Nautilus, swept along by the current, had passed under the Isthmus of Suez. So let's see what happens in these next two chapters as they head into the Mediterranean. Okay. Chapter 6. The Great Archipelago. The next day, February 12th, the Nautilus emerged to the surface. I rushed to the platform. 3 miles to the south, I could see the vague outline of Pelusium. An underground torrent had carried us from one sea to another, but while it was possible to negotiate the tunnel downstream, it would have been impossible to do so upstream. At about 7 o'clock, Ned and Conseil joined me. These two inseparable companions had slept quite soundly, unconscious with the great accomplishment of the Nautilus. Ned and Conseil are besties now. And they also just came in together. Crazy. Well, Monsieur le Naturaliste, asked the Canadian in a slightly battering tone, where is that Mediterranean you were talking about? They were roommates. Yeah, I was getting at something a little, more roommatious than roommates, if you know what I mean. But, that would never happen. Not in this time. They'll just be remembered as great friends. We are cruising on it right now, my friend. What? Explained Conseil. You mean this happened during the night? Yes, during the night. In a matter of minutes, we passed through that impassable isthmus. I don't believe a word of it, replied the Canadian. You were quite wrong, Ned, I continued. That low coastline which curves toward the south is the coast of Egypt. I am not as gullible as all that, Professor, answered the stubborn Canadian. If Monsieur says it is so, then it is, Conseil said to him. Moreover, Ned, Captain Nemo did me the honor of permitting me to remain at his side in the helmsman's cabin, while he himself steered the Nautilus through the narrow passage. Did you hear that, Ned? Said Conseil. You have such good eyes, I asked. Can't you make out the jetties of Port Said stretching out into the sea? The Canadian looked at them carefully. It's true, he said. You're quite right, Professor, and your captain is a masterful man. We are indeed in the Mediterranean. Good! Let's have a little chat, if you please, about our private little matter, but someplace no one can hear us. I realized, of course, what the Canadian was coming to. In any case, I thought it best to discuss the matter since he was taking it so seriously. The three of us went and sat down near the searchlight, where we were less exposed to the spray of the waves. "All right, Ned. Go ahead. We are listening," I said. "What do you have on your mind?" "What I have to tell you is very simple," replied the Canadian. "We are in Europe, and before the whims of Captain Nemo drag us into the depth of the polar seas or take us back to Oceania, I suggest that we leave the Nautilus." I must confess that these discussions with the Canadian always troubled me. I hadn't the least desire to deprive my companions of their freedom, but I personally hadn't had the least desire to abandon Captain Nemo. Thanks to him and his craft, I was daily adding to my knowledge in my studies of the sea, and I was completely revising my book about the marine world and the very depths of the sea, and doing it in the most natural environment. Would I have another opportunity to study the wonders of the sea? No, never. I could never consider the idea of abandoning the Nautilus before our explorations were completed. "Tell me, frankly, my friend," I said, "is this life aboard the Nautilus really boring you? Are you really sorry that fate has thrown you in the hands of Captain Nemo?" The Canadian hesitated a few moments before replying. Then, crossing his arms, he said, "Frankly, I am not sorry to have taken this voyage under the seas. I'll be happy to have done it, but in order to have done it, it must end. That's how I feel about it." "It will end, Ned. When and where? Where, I do not know." Aw. Cute text. "Everything that has a beginning must come to an end in this world." "I'm in the same opinion as Monsieur," replied Conseil, "and it is more than likely that having explored all the seas on this earth, Captain Nemo will give us the boot, cried. "The boot?" cried the Canadian. "A thrashing, you mean?" "Let us not exaggerate, Master Land," I continue. "We are nothing to fear from the captain, but I do not disagree with Conseil's ideas either. We know all the secrets of the Nautilus, and I do not think that its commander, in order to give us our freedom, will resign himself to having them revealed to the whole world." "But just what do you think will happen?" asked the Canadian. "There is always a chance that during the next 6 months, we will have another opportunity that we can take advantage of." "Oh, that's fine," exclaimed Ned Land. "And where we are likely to be 6 months from now, if you please, Monsieur le Naturaliste?" "Here, or perhaps in China. The Nautilus moves fast, as you know. It speeds across the oceans, as swallows fly through the air, or as an express train runs over the continents. It does not fear sailing the well-traveled sea lanes. Who knows? It may well cruise along the shores of France, England, or even America, where an escape may be as feasible as it is here." "Monsieur Aronnax," replied the Canadian, "your arguments are fundamentally wrong and devoid of sense. You are always talk about the future. We will be there. We will be here. Let us talk about the present. We are here, and let us take advantage of it now." I realized, of course, that Ned's arguments were sounder than mine. He was on solid ground, and I did not think of any new arguments to bolster my opinion. "Monsieur," continued Ned, "let us assume the impossible. Suppose the Canadian were to offer you your freedom now, that this very day. Would you accept?" "I do not know," I replied. "And if he were to add that the offer he is making to you today would not be renewed, would you accept?" I did not answer. "And what does my friend Conseil have to say about all this?" said Ned Land. "Your friend Conseil," replied the worthy lad calmly, "has nothing to say. He is absolutely unconcerned in this matter. Conseil is a bachelor, just like his master and just like his companion. He has no wife, he has no parents, he has no children waiting for his return home. Conseil is in the service of Monsieur, and he thinks like Monsieur. He talks like Monsieur, and to his great regret, he cannot be counted upon to decide this issue. Only two persons are facing each other over here. On one hand, we have Monsieur, and the other, Ned Land. Conseil is here to listen, and he is here to keep score. What a in-depth view of Conseil. Like, this whole book, he's been so, you know, I know he kind of is Arena's servant, and he holds on to that fervently. Even though he's making a really strong connection with Ned, nothing can seem to tear him away from Arena. Anyway, I couldn't help smiling to see Conseil effacing his personality so completely. The Canadian must have been delighted without doubt not to have him as an opponent. Well then, Monsieur, said Ned Land, since Conseil doesn't exist, this discussion is between you and me, and I have spoken, and you have listened. What is your answer? Evasions were no longer possible, and I faced the issue with the utmost frankness. Here's my answer, Ned. I said, you are quite right, and my arguments are not as sound as yours. We cannot depend on Captain Nemo's goodwill. Plain common sense will prevent him from setting us free. On the other hand, plain common sense tells us to take advantage of the first opportunity to escape. Good, Monsieur Arena, you have spoken well and wisely. But, I said, I must emphasize one important point. The opportunity must be a good one. Our first attempt to escape must succeed, for if it fails, we shall never have another opportunity, and Captain Nemo will never forgive us. That's right, replied the Canadian, but what you have said applies to all of our attempts to escape, whether it takes place in 2 years or 2 days. Therefore, the question remains the same. If the occasion arises, we must seize it. I agree. Now tell me, Ned, was it your idea of a favorable opportunity? Well, suppose that on some dark night the Nautilus is not far from a European coast. In that case, you would try to swim to safety? We would certainly do so if we were close enough to the shore and if the ship were floating on the surface. We wouldn't, of course, if we were too far off, or if the ship were underwater. In that case, what would you do? Try to put my hands on the dinghy. I know how to maneuver it. Once free from its bolts, we would get inside and rise to the surface. The pilot stationed ashore would even see us escape. Would not even see us escape. Very well, Ned. Keep your eyes open for such an occasion, but remember, if your plan fails, we are lost. I will keep that in mind. Now, Ned, would you like to know what I really think of your plan? Of course, Monsieur Arena. I am not saying I hope, I think that a favorable opportunity will present itself. Why not? Why not? Will never present itself, sorry. Why not? Because Captain Nemo must be aware that we still hope to regain our freedom someday. He will be constantly on his guard, especially when sailing close to European shores. I agree completely with Monsieur, says Conseil. We'll see soon enough, replied Ned Land, who shook his head with an air of confidence. And now, Ned, I added, let us leave it there. Not another word on the subject. When you are ready, let us know, and we shall follow you. I rely entirely on you. This conversation, which was to have such serious consequences later on, came to an end. I should add, however, that events seemed to confirm my prediction, to the great distress of the Canadian. Whether Captain Nemo distrusted us in the well-traveled sea lanes, or whether he wished to keep us out of sight of the numerous ships sailing the Mediterranean, I do not know. Whatever it was, the Nautilus remained submerged most of the time, or kept far from the shores. When it did emerge, only the pilot's cage rose above the surface. When submerged, it dived to great depths, because in sailing between the Greek archipelago and Asia Minor, we did not even touch bottom at over 6,000 feet. For this reason, I did not realize that we were near the island of Carpathos, one of the Sporades, until Captain Nemo, pointing to a spot on a map, recited the following verse in Vigil. Est in Carpathia Neptuni gerucite vats Corellis Proteus. In the sea of Carpathia lives Proteus, sinister prophet of Neptune. It was, in fact, the ancient abode of Proteus, the old shepherd of Neptune's flocks, now in the island of Scarpantano, situated between Rhodes and Crete. I saw only its granite base through the panels of the saloon. The next day, February 14th, I decided to spend a few hours studying the fish of the archipelago, but for some unknown reason, the panels remained hermetically sealed. On taking our bearings, I gathered that the Nautilus was heading toward toward Candia, the ancient isle of Crete. When I had boarded the Abraham Lincoln, this entire island had just revolted against the despotism of the Turks. I did not know that what had since happened to this insurrection, and I took it for granted that Captain Nemo did not know either, since he had no means of communicating with the land. Hence, I did not even mention this when he and I were in the saloon that evening. Moreover, bless me, thanks. Moreover, he was silent and seemed preoccupied. Contrary to his usual custom, however, he had both panels opened and kept pacing from one to another, keeping a close watch on the expanse of those waters. What was on his mind? I could not imagine, and I spent my time studying the fish that swam before my eyes. Among many, I noticed some gobies, mentioned by Aristotle, known as rocklings or sea loaches, frequently found in the salt water near the delta of Nile. Are we curious what gobies look like? I'm a bit curious. Oh, they're cute. Here's a goby. Chilling like a goby. All right. Near them were semi-phosphorescent snappers, a species of spheroid fish, which the Egyptians included among their sacred animals, and whose arrival in the Nile announced the coming of fertile floods. Why did I say fertile? Fertile floods, and was welcome with religious ceremonies. I also noticed some Shellian, about 10 inches long, bony fish with transparent scales. Livid in color and dotted with red. They eat enormous quantities of marine plants, which give them an exquisite flavor. They were highly praised by the gourmets of ancient Rome, and their entrails, cooked with lepre eggs, peacock brains, and flamingo tongues, created an exquisite dish which delighted the emperor of Vitellius. Another inhabitant of these waters was attracted my attention and reminded me of the ancient world was the remora. And then it says there are a dozen species found in the tropical and temperate seas. They have large oval sucking discs that are hard to dislodge when attached to whales, sharks, porcupines, or even ships. In some parts of the tropics, fishermen use them to catch sea turtles. The professor describes how this was done on page 393. Okay, continuing on. Related to the sucking fish. The remora often travels attached to the belly of sharks. According to ancient legends, this little fish, by adhering to the keel of a ship, could bring it to a dead stop. One of them, they said, had actually held back Antony's ship during the Battle of Actium and had facilitated the victory of Augustus. How little it takes to change the destiny of a nation. I also observed some magnificent anthias, which belonged to the order of Lutanidae, a sacred fish to the Greeks, who attributed to them a power strong enough to drive sea monsters out of their waters. Their name means flower, a very appropriate name due to their glimmering colors and shades ranging from a deep red through a white pale pink to the most striking brilliancy of ruby, as well as to the fleeting soft reflections of their dorsal fins. I could not take my eyes off those marvels of the sea, but suddenly my vision was struck by an unexpected sight. A man had suddenly appeared in the midst of those waters, a diver, with a leather purse attached to his belt. It was not a body floating in the water, it was a living man, swimming with vigorous strokes, rising from time to the surface to catch his breath, and diving down again. Deeply moved, I turned to the captain and cried out, "A man! A shipwrecked man! We must save him, whatever the price!" The captain did not reply. He came to the window and leaned against the panel. The man had approached and was now looking at us, with his face pressed up against the glass. To my great astonishment, Captain Nemo signaled to him. The diver answered with a wave of his hand, rose immediately to the surface of the sea, and did not appear again. "Do not be disturbed," the captain said to me. "It's Nicholas, the Cape Matapan, nicknamed the Fish. He is well known throughout the Cyclades, a tough and bold diver. He is thoroughly at home in water, and he lives in it more than he does on land. He swims constantly from one island to another, and at times he goes as far as Crete. You know him, Captain?" "Of course, Monsieur Aronnaud." Then Captain Nemo went to a bureau standing by the left panel of the saloon. Next to the bureau, I noticed a chest bound with iron strips, having a plaque on the lid that bore the name Nautilus in its emblem, Mobilis Immobili. The captain, ignoring my presence, opened the bureau, which turned out to be a safe filled with ingots. They were ingots of gold. Where did this precious metal, worth more than a fortune, come from? Where was the captain getting this gold, and what was he going to do with it? I looked on, without saying a word. The captain took out the ingots one by one and arranged them neatly in a chest until it was filled to the top. I estimated that gold at more than 2,000 kilograms, worth more than 5 million francs. The chest was securely fastened, and the captain wore an address on the lid in what must have been modern Greek. Then the captain pressed a button, communicating with the control room. 4 men appeared, and not without difficulty, they shoved the chest out of the room. I soon heard them working with pulleys to lift the chest on the iron stairway. Then Captain Nemo turned to me and said, "Now, Monsieur le Professeur, what were you saying?" "I wasn't saying a thing, Captain." "Then, Monsieur, you will permit me to bid you a good night." And without another word, he left the room. I went back to my room very perplexed. I tried to sleep, but in vain. What possible relationship could there be between the diver and that chest filled with gold? Soon I felt the ship rolling and pitching and realized that the Nautilus was leaving the depths of the sea and rising to the surface. I heard the sound of footsteps on the platform. I realized that the dinghy was being detached and put out to sea. I heard it strike the side of the ship, and then all noises ceased. Moreover, 2 hours later, I heard the same noises, the same comings and goings. The dinghy was hauled on board, refastened to its sockets, and the Nautilus dived once more into the sea. So then, those millions who had been delivered to their destination, just where had they been delivered? Who was Captain Nemo's correspondent? On the following day, I related the events of the previous night to Conseil and the Canadian, events that aroused my curiosity to the highest pitch. My companions were no less surprised than I. "But where does he get these millions?" asked Ned Land. I could not answer that question. After lunch, I went to the saloon and sat down to my work. Until 5 in the afternoon, I organized my notes. Then I felt so hot that I had to take off my byssus coat. Was there something the matter with me? Was this strange indeed, since we were not in the tropics? The Nautilus was in deep waters, and there should have been no rise in temperature. I looked at the manometer. We were in a depth of 60 feet beyond the reach of earthly heat. I continued with my work, but the temperature kept rising, and it was becoming intolerable. Could there be a fire on board? I asked myself. I was about to leave the saloon when Captain Nemo came in. He went over to the thermometer, consulted it, and came over to me. 108 degrees Fahrenheit, he said. "So I have noticed, Captain," I realized, "and if it gets any hotter, we will not be able to bear it." "Oh, Monsieur le Professeur, this temperature will not go higher unless we want it to." "You mean we can regulate it?" "No, but I can move away from the furnace that is producing it." "Is it coming from outside?" "Undoubtedly. We are cruising in a current of boiling water." "How is that possible?" I cried. "Look." Sip of tea. Okay. The panels opened, and I saw the sea was entirely white around the Nautilus. Volumes of sulfurous vapors were bubbling to the midst of the waves, which were boiling like water in a cauldron. I touched one of the windows with my hand, but it was so hot I had to withdraw it. "Where are we?" I asked. "We are near the island of Santorin, Professor," answered the captain. Santorin. To be more precise, we are right in the channel that separates Ne Kumene and the Palea Kumane. I wanted to offer you the spectacle of a submerged volcano. Damn, that's so cool. I thought the formation of these islands was completed. "Nothing is ever completed in these volcanic zones," replied Captain Nemo, "and the earth is constantly altered to these infernal fires. As early as the year 19 AD, according to Cassiotus and Pliny, a new island. The Ada was recently formed. Later, this island sank beneath the waves, but it reappeared in 69 AD, only to disappear once more. From that time until recently, Pluto seemed to have been resting from the labors, and these infernal regions were calm. But on February 3rd, 1866, a new island named George Island emerged in the midst of sulfurous vapors in the vicinity of Ne Kumene and settled down on the 6th of that same month. 7 days later, on the 13th of February, the island of Aprosea appeared, leaving a channel over 30 feet wide between it and Ne Kumene. I was in these waters when the phenomenon took place. I was in a position to observe it, all its phases. The island of Aphoresia, round in shape, measured 300 feet in diameter and was 30 feet high. It was composed of black and vitreous lava mixed with fragments of feldspar. Finally, on the 10th of March, a smaller island called Rika appeared near Ne Kumene, and since then these three islands were fused together, forming one big island. "In what channel are we now?" I asked. "In this one," replied Captain Nemo, showing me a map of the archipelago. "You will notice that I have drawn in the new islands also. Will this channel be filled in one of these days?" "It is very probable, Monsieur Arenat, for since 1866, 8 small islands have emerged near Port St. Nicholas of Palea Kumene. It is evident that Ne and Palea will become one sometime in the future. If, in the middle of the Pacific, we have microscopic organisms eating continents, here we have volcanic eruptions. Look, monsieur. Look at the work that is going on under these waves." I returned to the window. The Nautilus had stopped. The heat was becoming unbearable. The sea, which had been white, was now turning red because of the presence of iron salt. Although the saloon was hermetically sealed, the very offensive odor of sulfur filled the room, and outside scarlet flames cast such a brilliant light that our light appeared dim. I was immersed in perspiration. I was suffocating. I felt as if I were being cooked. Yes, really cooked alive. "We cannot remain for much longer in these boiling waters," I said to the captain. "No, it would not be wise," replied the captain calmly. He gave an order. The Nautilus veered and moved away from that fiery furnace, which it could not face with impunity. A quarter of an hour later, we were breathing once more the fresh air of the sea. The thought then struck me that if Ned Land had chosen to escape in these waters, he would not have come out of the sea of fire alive. On the following day, February 16th, we left that basin lying between Rhodes and Alexandria, which, it is said, has a depth of over 9,000 feet, and the Nautilus, passing wide of Cerigo, left the Greek archipelago after doubling Cape Matapan. Wow. Okay, cool. And that takes us to chapter 7. Which is 11 pages. Not even. It's like 10 and a half. So yeah, that was a cool chapter. We made it through the Mediterranean, and I think the other really significant thing about chapter 6 was that there was that discussion between Ned and Conseil and Arnaud about leaving the ship and Ned seems very serious about it. And if I have any prediction, I think Ned will just like leave in the night or something. Chapter 7. Across the Mediterranean in 48 hours. Ooh, that's a cool chapter title. Let's see if it's true. The Mediterranean, that incomparable blue sea, known to the Hebrews as the Great Sea, to the Greeks as the Sea, and the Romans as Mare Nostrum, our sea, adored with orange groves, aloes, and sea pine, scented with fragrance of the myrtle, studded with rugged mountains, immersed in a pure, crystal clear atmosphere, incessantly stirred by volcanic eruptions. This sea is a veritable battlefield in which Neptune and Pluto are perpetually struggling for the conquest of the world. On its shores and on its waters, said Michelet, man is continuously rejuvenated in one of the most invigorating climates of the globe. Man, what an opening paragraph. Oh my God, that was beautiful. Beautiful as it was, I could barely catch a glimpse of the basin, which covers an area of more than 800,000 square miles. Captain Nemo's special knowledge of these regions would have been immensely helpful, but that mysterious man did not appear once during that speedy crossing. I estimated that the Nautilus covered a distance of about 1,500 miles in 48 hours, cruising away beneath the waves. Having sailed from the waters of Greece on the 16th of February, by dawn of the 18th, we had crossed the straits of Gibraltar. You know what's this book has been so weird that I've been reading it like with the dates lining up to the book perfectly, because it's like, yeah, now it's February 18th and today is February 18th. Isn't that weird? Anyway, like I could have chosen any day to hop on stream, but it just so happened to be the day that we get to that day in the book. I don't know. Weird. It was evident that Captain Nemo had no love for the Mediterranean, surrounded as it was by countries from which he was fleeing. Its waters and its breezes brought back too many memories, too many regrets, perhaps. Furthermore, he did not have that freedom of movement and independence from that wide and open seas offered him, and his Nautilus felt confined by those close shores of Africa and Europe. Our speed was now 25 miles an hour, and it goes without saying that Ned Land, to his great disappointment, had to give up his plans to escape. He could not have launched the dinghy while we were traveling at a speed exceeding 30 or 40 feet per second. To escape from the Nautilus under those conditions would have been as hazardous as jumping from a train traveling at the same speed, a rash move if ever there was one. Moreover, our craft surfaced only at night, and only to replenish our supply of air. It navigated solely by its compass and log. Under the circumstances, I saw as much of the Mediterranean as a passenger in the fast-moving train sees the landscape that sweep before his eyes. He can distinguish different objects appearing on the horizon, but sees only a dim blur of the objects in the foreground as they flash by with the speed of lightning. Nevertheless, Conseil and I were able to observe some species of those Mediterranean fish, especially those whose fins were powerful enough to enable them to keep up with the Nautilus, if only for a very short time. We studied them carefully through the panels, and our notes will permit me to describe, however briefly, the animal life of that sea. Preparing myself mentally for more nautical terms. Among the numerous fish that swam in these waters, I saw some clearly. I caught I caught a passing glimpse of others, and some, because of the speed of the Nautilus, escaped me completely. My classification of those animals will, therefore, be whimsical rather than scientific, but this method will more than suffice to describe my fleeting impressions. In the midst of those waters, brilliantly illuminated by our searchlight, I saw meandering lampreys, more than 3 feet long, and of the kind found in almost every sea. Heintia, a species of ray whose flat bodies measure 5 feet across, with white bellies and ash-gray speckled backs, resembling large shaws carried away by the currents. Other rays passed so swiftly that I was unable to determine whether they deserved to be called eagles, a name given them by the ancient Greeks, or whether they deserved to be called rats, toads, or bats, names given them by modern fishermen. Millander sharks, 12 feet in length, especially feared by divers, vying with each other in speed. Sea foxes, 8 feet in length, gifted with a keen sense of smell, swam by, looking like large blue shadows. Dorados, a species of sporoid, some of which measured 4 feet, appeared all dressed up in silver and blue, speckled with stripes that contrasted sharply with the dark color of their fins. This specimen, once sacred to Venus, has golden eyebrows. It is a very precious animal, denizen of all waters, whether fresh or salt, rivers, lakes, or oceans, and adaptable to any climate or temperature. It forbears go back to geological times and have retained all their pristine beauty. Magnificent sturgeons, measuring 20 or 30 feet, possessed great speed, beat against our panels with their powerful tails, displaying their bluish backs speckled with brown spots. They resemble sharks, but lack the strength of that animal. They are found in all seas. In the spring, they like to swim up large streams, struggling against the currents of the Volga, the Po, the Rhine, the Lori, and the Oder, feeding on herrings, mackerel, salmon, and cod. Although they belong to the class of cartilaginous fish, their flesh is excellent. They may be eaten fresh, dried, pickled, or salted. In former days, their flesh was considered more than worthy for the table of Lucilius. But among the denizens of the Mediterranean that I observed with care when the Nautilus cruised near the surface, one belonged to the 63rd genus of bony fish. They were tuna, with dark bluish backs, silvery bellies, and dorsal stripes that glittered like gold. They are known to follow the course of ships, seeking the cool shade as protection from the tropical sun. They do not belly their reputation because they followed the Nautilus, just as they had followed the ships of La Payus. For hours they struggled to keep up with us. I never tired of admiring those animals, so beautifully fashioned for speed, with their small heads, their sleek and spindle-shaped bodies, and their forked tails. They attain a length of 10 feet, and their dorsal fins are endowed with extraordinary power. They swam in a triangular formation, resembling the flight of certain birds, and with equal speed. The ancients used to say that they must have had a knowledge both of strategy and geometry. However, they cannot elude the snares of the fishermen of Provence, who prize them as much as they did the natives of Propintus and of Italy, and they hurl themselves blindly and heedlessly onto the nets of the fishermen of Marcellus. I shall mention in passing that Mediterranean fish which conceal an eye only catch a glimpse. There were whitish gymnotes which swept by Like clouds of intangible mist, conjure conger eels, 10 or 13 feet in length, vividly colored with green, blue, and yellow, codfish, 3 feet long, whose liver makes a tasty morsel, copaleotene, looking like thin, delicate seaweed, gurnards, called lyrefish by the poets, but which the sailors call the whistling fish, where snouts are supplied with 2 triangular plates that resemble Homer's instrument, flying swallows or flying gurnards, which can swim with the speed of birds, which accounts for their name, species of perch, redhead, whose dorsal fins are speckled with filaments, aloe, a species of shard, which is extremely sensitive to the silvery sound of little bells, whose body is flecked with black, gray, brown, blue, yellow, and green. Splendid turbots, pheasants of the sea, with yellowish fins, whose diamond-shaped body is spotted with brown and yellow. Finally, a school of beautiful red mullets, real seabirds of paradise. Romans paid as much as 10,000 sesterces apiece just for the pleasure of seeing them die slowly, and with cruel eyes watching them change from a deep vermilion to a pale white. Because of the vertiginous speed of the Nautilus, vertiginous speed of the Nautilus as it moved through those fertile and prolific waters, we were unable to observe the murrelets, the triggerfish, the tetradons, the seahorses, um, the bellows fish, the bennies, the surmulets, the rainbow fish, the smelts, the flying fish, the anchovies, the sea breams, the bopes, the orphies, and the representatives of the older pleuronectides, such as the dabs, flounders, pallas, or sole, all common both in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. As for marine mammals, I thought I saw, as we sailed into the Atlantic, 2 or 3 cachalots, with 1 dorsal fin, belonging to the genus of sperm whale, a few dolphins of the the genus Globiphala, rarely found elsewhere, and the front parts of those heads are streaked with small zebra-like lines. We saw also about a dozen or so white-bellied seals with black fur, known by the name of monks, because they truly resemble Dominican friars, 10 feet wide in length. Conseil believed he had seen a sea turtle 6 feet wide, with 3 jutting ridges running down its back. I was sorry not to have seen this tortoise, for according to Conseil's description, it must have been a luth, a leatherback, a very rare specimen. The only reptiles I saw were a few cancoins with elongated shells. As for zoophytes, I did gaze with delight, but only for a few seconds, at a magnificent orange-colored galorgria that clung to the port panel. It was a long, tenuous filament which spread into an infinite number of branches, ending at the most delicate filigree lacework ever spun by the rivals of Arachne. Unfortunately, I was not able to catch this wonderful specimen. Many other Mediterranean zoophytes were undoubtedly have escaped my notice if the Nautilus, during the evening of the 26th, had not slowed down considerably. We're up to the 26th, which means I cannot read this book again until the 26th. Just kidding. We were then sailing between Sicily and the coast of Tunis. In the narrow channel between Cape Bon and the Messina Strait, the seabed rises abruptly. At this point, the seabed rises up to within 60 feet below the surface, whereas on each side of this ridge, the depth goes down well over 200 feet. The Nautilus had to maneuver very carefully in order to avoid crashing against that underwater barrier. I showed Conseil the exact position of the long reef on a map of the Mediterranean. If Monsieur doesn't mind me saying so, said Conseil, it looks like a real isthmus connecting Europe to Africa. Yes, my lad, it cuts right across the entire Strait of Libya, and the surrounding made by Smith prove that the continents were formerly connected between Cape Bon and Cape Farina. I can well believe it, said Conseil. I might well add, I replied, that a similar barrier exists between Gibraltar and Ceuta, which in geological times connected them and closed off the Mediterranean completely. Well, said Conseil, what would happen if volcanic convulsion were to raise these barriers above the water again? It isn't very likely, Conseil. Will Monsieur permit me to continue? If this phenomenon were to occur, it would be very unfortunate for Monsieur de Lesseps, who is going to do so much trouble to build the Suez Canal. Of course, but as I have just said, it is not likely that it will ever occur. The violence of subterranean convulsions is constantly diminishing. Volcanoes, which were so numerous in the early days of this earth, are slowly becoming extinct. The heat in the inner bowels of the globe is cooling, and the temperature of its various strata is decreasing appreciably every century. This will eventually be the calamity of the earth, for this heat is the very life of this planet. But there is always the sun. The sun is not enough, Conseil. The sun cannot breathe life into a corpse, can it? Well, no, I suppose not. Well, my friend, one of these days our earth will become a cold, lifeless body, just like the moon, which lost its vital heat long ago. A long, long time ago, will become inhabitable and uninhabited. And how many centuries will that take? Asked Conseil. Perhaps many millions of years. My lad. Well, replied Conseil, if that is the case, we will have more than enough time to complete our journey, unless, of course, Ned Land messes things up. Conseil, reassured, went back to the study of high barrier which the Nautilus was skirting at close range and at moderate speed. There, on that rocky volcanic soil, spread a whole world of living flora, sponges, holothurians, or sea slugs, translucent cyppidae with reddish tendrils, emitting a faint phosphorescent glow. Briodes, commonly known as sea cucumbers, immersed in a glistening rainbow of the solar spectrum. Ambulatory or feather stars a yard across, whose purple color cast a red glow around them. Tree-like urayales of spectacular beauty. Pavanaceae with long stalks, countless numbers of edible sea urchins of various species, and green sea anemones with grayish trunks and brown discs, almost invisible within their olive-hued tentacles. Conseil had kept busy observing, above all, the mollusks and the articulata, and although a list of what he noted may be somewhat barren, I do not wish to do him an injustice by omitting his personal observations. In the sub-kingdom of mollusks, he mentions numerous scallops, genus Peckintidae, Spondoi, spiny oysters piled on top of each other, triangular wedge shells, trident-shaped helionae with yellow fins and transparent shells, orange-colored Plorobranchia resembling eggs speckled with green dots, Aplysia, known also as sea hare, Dolabile, freshly acere, guys, these words are hard, parasol shells, peculiar to the Mediterranean, sea ears of seashells, which produce a very valuable mother of pearl, red flamed scallops, corrugulated cockles, which the natives of Languedoc prefer to oysters, Clovis, preferred by the natives of Marcellus, a species of clam abundant to the coasts of North America. So popular in New York, gill-covered comb shells of various colors, lithodoes crouching inside their holes, whose peppery taste delights me, furrowed Veneribecadiae, whose shells bold with ridges, Cynthiae, bristling with scarlet humps, Canaria, which resemble gondolas, crowned ferules, antellates with spiral shells, Mentelius, aeolides resembling tiny slugs, Cavolinae, crawling on their backs, and among others, the Auricula mynostis, oval-shaped, fawn-colored Scaleria, oh my god, this hurts. Littoral periwinkles, Inithae, Cinriae, Petricolae, Laminaliaria, Cabacons, Pandoras, etc. Jesus Christ. Oh my god. These words that I do not know. Also, I wonder what Jules Verne was thinking when he just starts listing different fish that they're looking at. Like, does he actually think that people who are reading this book are like, you know what? I'm going to look up all of these fish in a book. Like, just crazy. But I guess he's playing to an audience that maybe is already interested in this topic, so maybe they already know, but my God. Anyway. As for the articula, they are not properly divided, in Conseil's notes, into 6 classes, 3 of which belong to the marine world. These are the classes. We got 4 more pages, guys. More like 3. The Cerophoda and the Annelids. The crustaceans are divided into 9 orders, and the first of these orders comprises the decapods, that is to say, animals whose head and thorax are generally joined together, and whose mouths are formed by several pairs of jaws, and having 4, 5, or 6 pairs of legs on their thorax. Conseil follows the classification of our teacher, Milne Edwards, who divided them into 3 sections of decapod: the Branchioria, the Macurara, and the Anomura. These names are not strictly scientific, but they are correct and precise. But they are among the Branchiora. Conseil mentions Amethae, whose forehead is armed with 2 big horns, one on each side. The Anichidae scorpion, whom I do not know why the Greeks used as a symbol of wisdom. Some spider crabs, one species of which apparently strayed into these shallow waters, because ordinarily they live in deep waters. Xanathe, Peluminae, rhombides, granular calipae, very easy to digest, Conseil notes. Toothless choristes, ebolae, symbilotes, woolly families. We have woolly dorapi, etc. Among the Mantura, Subdivided into 5 families, we have the Sericinae, the burrowers, the Acetae, the Paleomondae, the Oxypodes. He he mentions the rock lobsters, the females of which is highly esteemed as food, scilari or squills, and all kinds of edible species. Concealed does not cite, however, the subdivision of Asteraceae, who includes the lobster proper, because the spiny lobster is only denizen of these Mediterranean. Finally, among the Anemona, he noticed the Drocinae, who feel at home inside whatever abandoned shells they find. The Homolae, who their spiny forehead, hermit crabs, porcelain crabs, etc. Here the work of Conseil ended. He did not have enough time to complete the class of crustaceans. By examining the stomapods, the amphipods, the homopods, the isopods, the trilobite, the branchiopods, the ostracods, and the entomostrae. And in order to have completed his notes in the marine atriculata, he would have to mention the class of Cerphoda, which includes the psycho. Oh my gosh. I think this is the hardest chapter I've ever read in this book. I'm getting a workout. Includes the Cyclopes, the Argilli, followed by the class of annelids, whom he would not have forgotten to divide into the tubercles of the dorsibranches. But once having passed the shallow waters of the Straits of Libya, the Nautilus began to sail in deep waters, and its usual speed. From there on, there were no more mollusks, articula, or zoophytes. Only an occasional large fish swam by, like a shadow. During the night of February 16th or 17th, we entered the second basin of the Mediterranean, whose greatest depth reaches nearly 10,000 feet. Using its inclined fins to driven by its propellers, the Nautilus submerged into the lowest depths of the sea. In the absence of natural marvels, the mass of waters offered the most moving and terrifying scenes. We were then crossing the part of the Mediterranean that is so prolific with tragedies. From the coast of Algeria to the shores of Provence, how many ships had sunk beneath the waves? The Mediterranean is only a lake compared to the vast, watery plains of the Pacific, but it is a capricious lake with changing moods, which one day favors the caresses of frail vessels that seem to float between the deep blue of its waters and the azure sky, and on the narrow lashed by the winds, it is raging and convulsive, smashing the strongest ships and the sharp and powerful blows of its billows. During the swift journey across its depths, what tragedies I saw, scattered everywhere at the bottom of the sea. Some already encrusted with coral, others covered with only a layer of rust. Anchors, cannons, and cannonballs, chains, iron fittings, propellers, broken cylinders, boilers, and hulls hanging in the water, some uptight and others floating upside down. On of those wrecked ships, some had perished in collisions, and others had struck against granite reefs. Some had sunk to the bottom perpendicularly, their masts still in place of their ringing turned by the water. They appeared as if anchored in an immense eerie dock, waiting for a moment to cast off. When the Nautilus moved among them and cast its brilliant light upon them, it seemed as if they were going to salute us with a dip of their flag. No, there was nothing but silence and death in the field of catastrophes. I noticed that the number of wrecks at the bottom of the Mediterranean increased as we approached the Straits of Gibraltar. The shores of Africa and Europe come closer together here, and collisions, of course, occur more frequently in that narrow space. I saw numerous iron hulls, weird, fantastic wrecks of steamers, some lying flat, others standing upright, resembling formidable animals. One of these boats, ripped on one side, funnel bent, paddle wheels gone except for this framework, rudder separated by the stern but still held by a chain, and with its rear nameplate corroded by the salty water, was a terrifying sight. How many lives had been destroyed in that shipwreck? How many victims had been swept beneath the waves? How many victims had every sailor survived to tell the story of that terrible disaster, or did the waves still hold the secret of that tragedy? I do not know why, but it occurred to me that this ship buried in the sea could be the Atlas, which had disappeared with all the board 20 years before, and of which nothing more had been heard. Ah, what a grim story could be written about the depths of the Mediterranean, that vast burial ground where so much wealth has been lost, where so many victims have perished. Swift and indifferent, the Nautilus moved at full speed among these ruins. On February 18th, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, we reached the entrance of the Strait of Gibraltar. There are two currents in this strait. An upper current, which carries the water of the Atlantic Ocean into the basin of the Mediterranean, which was identified many years ago. Then there is a lower countercurrent, whose existence had to be proved by simple logic. The volume of water in the Mediterranean, incessantly increased by the waves of the Atlantic and by the rivers that flow into it, should raise the level of that sea year after year because its evaporation is not sufficient to restore the balance. But this, as we know, is not the case. Hence, we had to assume the existence of an undercurrent which carries the overflow of the Mediterranean through the Strait of Gibraltar into the Atlantic. It was precisely in this undercurrent that the Nautilus was sailing, and it soon sped through the narrow channel. Just for a moment, I caught a fleeting glimpse of the memorable Temple of Hercules, submerged, as we were told by Pliny and Averroes, together with a low island on which it stood. A few minutes later, we were cruising on the surface of the Atlantic. All right, that was chapter 7. That was the most difficult chapter I've ever read. Oh my God, those fish. Okay, 284. Let's mark it in our story graph. If you'd like to follow me on Storygraph, I'm just Juana Peral. And we are 59% of the way through the book. Okay, and with that, I'm going to go. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I appreciate you being here. And I'm sure I will be back later this week for more reading. Yeah. Okay, bye.